There are those who do what is expected of them, prescribed a path at birth by parents, society, and life circumstances. They follow that path. And there are those who do otherwise. Risk takers, mold breakers, thinkers, ideators, people who are filled with an entheos, a drive, an impulse to be other. As someone who lives an utterly unorthodox life, I have always been interested in these people. Their courage, willingness to trust themselves, and ability to stand firmly in their uniqueness inspires me. It's what helps me continue trailblazing when the lights dim and the world feels inhospitable. For a year, I worked as a journalist, speaking with and writing about every otherwise person I could find. But it wasn't enough. So, to further inspire the human spirit seeking something different, we made this. Join me on this unfolding sojourn, talking with artists, thinkers, spiritualists, and all those who live in the otherwise. I visited Orin Carpenter in his studio in Petaluma, California, to take a closer look at some of his paintings, both in progress and from his archives. Originally from Memphis, Tennessee, Orin is now an artist and art teacher at Marin Catholic High School. His work centers around themes of race and identity in America, with a focus on socio-political and historical events, stereotypes, and themes. His collage-style works, influenced by such Harlem Renaissance artists as Ramir Bearden, convey an activity and a sense of aliveness that almost make the viewer feel like they're looking at a living being. After the visit, Orin and I had the opportunity to sit and discuss his work and life story further.
Let's talk about your art,
okay.
Your work.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go a little further back. Let's talk about you.
Okay, all right.
Let's talk about you and where you come from.
All right, Memphis, Tennessee. Even in my bio, I always like to start off, I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, 5 months after Dr. King was assassinated. And I like to set up that story for various reasons. One, as a young kid of color, young African American, me trying to figure out who I was, but also a city trying to re-identify itself. This was the time that the civil rights movement was at its peak, where laws were being changed, things were being changed. One of our greatest leaders, Dr. King, who was a man who was flawed, as people like to remind us.
Sure. Who isn't?
Right. But
Find me that person.
But a huge impact and a treasure to not only just our country, but the world.
Yeah.
Because of what he set in motion. And so, for me, growing up then, I knew I was different, but that didn't happen until key moments in my life where it happened. I always knew. I think we all have a sense that we're different, because as kids, we're always looking in the mirror. We always can see, even going to school, that I look different than a certain person.
Right.
All these basic things, but there is an innocence and an honesty about it, an authenticity. And I think for me, that difference keyed in a couple of moments. One, it was when I was young with my mom and my brother. We went to a department store that no longer exists, and the interaction we had there with my mom and actually a clerk that actually worked there, where we were waiting a long time for her to be served, per se, and the person kept bypassing her, going to customers that were white. And of course, my mom, knowing that she had her sons there, kind of respectful manner brought it to his attention, and she said, "I want to speak to your manager about the treatment." And the clerk kind of smiled and said, "Well, that's fine, because my manager doesn't like N's either." So that was the first time I heard the N word as a young kid. Right, knew that wasn't a good word. Watched my mom's reaction, my reaction as well.
How did your mom react?
Well, of course, my mom's tough, right? But she knew she had her sons there. She knew the environment that she was in.
Yeah.
And she said, "That's fine." She said, "But I still want to see him, so I'll know for myself." And I remember how I felt. I remember how my brother looked. I remember how my mom reacted. So that was a key moment, going home. And of course, we didn't discuss it then. And now older, I knew my mom was processing, because as a mother, being disrespected that way in front of
your children.
Right? Which is a good thing, because if we weren't there, my mom would probably be in jail. So it's one of those moments too. And also as a kid, realizing I'm glad my dad wasn't there.
Yeah.
because I know my dad would have been in jail.
Yeah.
So for me, it was something that was always in the back of my head.
Yeah.
But the turning point then was when I would hear it or experience it in public, because again, at that point, then other kids that looked like me started to move in the neighborhood. In fact, my best friend now for 40 something years, that's when he and I kind of connected. And I just remember us going to different stores or the mall that was in our area. We were always being followed by security.
Yeah.
So all these little innuendos and these little things started to stand out more.
Yeah.
People locking doors when we walk by or clutching purses, those common things you always hear about every day, those were real. And so the turning point for that was we were focusing more on those negative things, right? And that then kind of eats away at your spirit, eats away at you. And that's why I always knew, even in my artwork, even before I started getting into the socially conscious artwork, it was something that I wanted to put in my work, didn't know how, but I knew I needed to. And so it finally got to a point to where I understood how I could tell the story, because again, I never wanted to tell the story from an angry black man point of view, because you can't have dialogue, right? I always put myself in a different position. If I constantly hear someone talk about how they are oppressed or how society constantly does certain things to them, if I'm on the other side, how open would I be to hear it?
Yeah.
Right? There'd be a certain point to where I could sit there, but then it's to the point where it's like, oh my gosh, okay. Now I'm starting to feel a certain way.
Yeah, I feel berated.
I feel berated. I feel guilty. There's shame. It's like, I don't want to live like that, right? I understand, but guess what?
Right.
So for me, that's always the challenge is, one, I don't want to compromise my story, but at the same time, how do I tell my story to where we can have that dialogue without having dialogue? And so that's what I want my work to be about.
You said a couple things there that I think are interesting. You said that you started to notice the negative sides of racism, which I don't want to misuse the term. I think racism is inherently negative, but there is also, awareness of racial difference, and I think that's not inherently negative.
Right.
That's observing we're different.
Yes.
Let's love and explore those differences. Racism is a negative expression of the intolerance for difference. And I liked that you said that you started to notice it more, and that wasn't working for you. It sounds like you found like that's not working for me to see the world with bitterness or with angry eyes. Even though it's very easy to do that when you're walking past a woman and she grabs her purse close to her or clutches her baby like you're somehow a threat.
Right.
It can make you really angry. But you started to notice, it sounds like that doesn't work for you.
No, and even in those moments to where I became victim to that emotion, to that feeling, and reacted in that way, then I was the one that had to deal with how I reacted. The one thing I always love hearing from my parents, my grandparents, they say you can't control a lot of the things in this world, but you can control how you respond.
Yeah.
And so even in those moments to where I did fall victim to allowing my emotions to go in that way, I was the one who had to deal with the backlash of feeling guilty because I reacted that way. And so it was one of those where it's like, okay, this person won twice.
Yeah. How did you, I think everyone watching this would love to know, how did you start to really implement that practice of not reacting to someone's hatred, vitriol, aggression with anger, vitriol, hatred, and aggression? What are some things that you did?
Wow. That's a deep question, a good question too. I just remember my dad always saying, you never let the enemy know that they've won. And then that's when the art came in. I said, well, you know what? I could do it in this way. This is more lasting to do it in an art piece. And even if that meant in those moments feeling that, going home, which I did, write it out, sketch it out, right? Those true emotions, being able to take that and use that as fuel.
Yeah, I think that's so cool. I think it's so cool because there's this, I think about this a lot. It's a really interesting thing when someone is aggressive to you for various reasons, things that have happened to me in my life, I think a lot about what would I do if somebody, came to me with aggression. What would I do? You don't want to leave a situation where someone's aggressive to you feeling like you submitted to their aggression and that aggression somehow dominated. And yet you don't want to meet that, what is it, an eye for an eye, you want to turn the other cheek. In a way that I say this a lot, alchemicalizes the energy that they brought into you. Like they're coming at you with this aggressive energy, and you take it in, and you're like, "Thank you. I'm actually going to use this energy, and I'm going to turn it into a dialogue with the entire world, in a ripple effect way. It could be my small community, but that is a chain reaction of conversation that came from this hatred that, I like to think people are infected with it, that it's not really who they are.
Right.
But it comes to me, or, you, and you are strong enough to hold it, not kick it back or amplify it, and then go home and write it out and maybe freaking cry or, feel terrible about it because it's not a good feeling, but then create something generative. I want everyone to do that.
Yeah.
I want everybody to be doing that.
And that's a powerful thing, and it's a hard thing.
Yeah.
Because I think a couple of things as you were sharing that, I thought about something that I've heard many times, how even when people come at you, that one bad moment doesn't define who you are. It just defines that was a bad moment for you. And with that, in that same vein, we have to approach life and people. The quote that I heard is, we judge others on their actions, but we judge ourselves on our intentions.
Definitely. And I think what I like too about it is that you touched on this really beautifully, there's a restorative justice quality to the way you are viewing the aggressor or the antagonist. And it goes right back to you wanting to have a dialogue where both parties on opposite sides of any difficult topic feel safe to conversate. And that's a radical procedure of thought. I mean, that is not something that we're getting better at it, I think, slowly and surely.
You think about that radical aspect, again, going back to the cancel culture. That's totally different.
Yeah.
That's different than...
It's the polar opposite.
It's the polar opposite. But it also ties back to the beginning for me in Scripture, right? We're all created in God's image. Right? It's that thing. We all should be respectful of each other. We all should know that every person on this earth, regardless of how we view them, regardless of what experiences we've had, whether they're in the prison system or not, everyone should be treated equally. What I mean by equally is as a human being.
Yeah. So tell me more about your thoughts on the effects and the impact of cancel culture.
It's funny because mixed emotions. When I first learned about it, when it first became, I guess, visible, per se, I was a fan of it because I understood. It was a young generation of saying, okay, look, especially how the country was, a generation saying, look, we've sat back and watched the older generation watch you guys do this for so long, and yet there's still no great results. We're tired of it. Yeah. We're tired of the same old thing. The only problem, like anything, when it comes to power, I just felt that the guidance, or they didn't have the right guidance in it. Now it's not about truth, per se. It's not necessarily, this is again my opinion, not about really trying to redirect where we need to go. It's more about, I now have the power to crush who I want to crush, or diminish who I want to diminish.
Right.
So in other words, it's the usual syndrome of the person being bullied now becomes the bully. And I think cancel culture, that's what we're doing. Again, it's not allowing us to have dialogue because you have a lot of people now who really want to just have the dialogue, but now they're afraid because if they say the wrong thing, or even just innuendos of some of the wrong things, they could be canceled.
Yeah.
And that's a fear I try not to live with, even when I'm posting things or certain things, it's funny talking with my kids, that's what they talk about. I say, well, you know what? I can't live in that fear. Again, the quote that I said, if the whole world approached everything by saying, if we judged each other based on our intentions and not actions, again, that can kind of open the door. So I understand it. I hope it is redirected in a positive way of why it was created. So I'm just going to be hopeful. I'll just say that. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's a great take on everything.
Yeah.
And I agree. I think there's been it's almost acting as like a censor on human messiness and human exploration and human disagreement.
Right.
And I agree with you. When it first happened, specifically in conjunction with the Me Too movement, I was all for it, and those were changes that really needed to be made. But it's like when the pendulum swings in the right direction, but sometimes it swings too far.
Right.
We're over there where it's like, okay, let's come back a little bit where we can still talk and say things and say the wrong thing.
Right.
We have to be able to say the wrong thing sometimes.
Right. Because how will we learn that it's the wrong thing?
Exactly.
That's that giving that space for correction.
Yeah.
Giving that space for me to learn. And it's funny, you talked about Socratic seminar earlier in our conversation. In our English department, that's what we do.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad to see schools are going to that point, because now we're bringing conversation back. And I love hearing the students, how they walk away enlightened, because they're like, I didn't realize about this person or that topic.
Yeah.
Now I see a different perspective, and I'm allowed to see that perspective in a space to where, whether I agree with it or not, I feel safe, regardless of where I stand. And that's the whole key. That's the key to it.
Yeah, there isn't a right or wrong.
Right.
There is a sense of a moral code.
Right.
But then within those boundaries, you express idea.
Right.
And you explore idea.
Because that's growth.
Yeah, right.
That's the only way we can have growth.
Exactly. Yeah. So you love comic books.
Oh, yes. Art and comic books, that was my safe space.
Yeah.
Because one thing my mom did as my brother and I were kids, when we lived in South Memphis, the inner city, before we moved, she would always take us to the library every Saturday. And my mom always shared with us, she said, this is a place you could be who you want to be, when you want to be, where you want to go, all in one place. So I always loved the library, I always loved reading. And that's when I found about great artists and my mentors, Jacob Lawrence, Ramir Bearden, which you can see in a lot of my work, all of these great artists, Picasso, and also comic books, right? I loved Marvel Comics, Stan Lee, because that was one of the first places I saw in this kind of forum where you had people who looked like me and who were different. I love sharing this point with people that Stan Lee, in fact, some of his two major characters were actually, they were inspired by Dr. King and Malcolm X. In fact, the X-Men, Charles Xavier, he was inspired by Dr. King, and Magneto was inspired by Malcolm X. And so Marvel Comics, I loved it because they dealt with topics that you wouldn't find anywhere else. And it was topics that I could connect with, and then I saw myself there. And so for me, the superpower that I had was my art. And so I could say what I want, how I want it, as loud as I want it. Right? I had that control. So that's where art and comic books have always been this great resource and escape for me.
In a really overt way, in a really direct way, what is the conversation that you're trying to inspire with your work?
We all have a story. And in those stories, there are similarities and there are differences. But there's beauty in all of that. And so I want people, when they see my work, to dream, to question, to comment, to feel okay in wherever they are in that, whether they agree with it or not, to feel okay with their own voice. Because I think once we realize that we have power in our own voices, we have power in our stories, when we can approach each other equally, not in a way to where I feel my story trumps your story, but our stories are equal in their differences, then that's when we can kind of start the healing. That's when we can have more conversation. And then that's when we realize the fear of unraveling some of the history that we have, regardless of how dark it is, it's a beautiful tragedy. And that's what kind of make our country the country that it is, even in its darkest times. That's why it's a beautiful place. And until we allow that to happen, we really won't know what we really have. So I say all that to say that's what I want my work to do. I want it to spark conversation. I want people to come to my work, meet at my work, start the conversation, and then leave my work and continue the conversation.
And is that conversation about the differences between African American and non-African American men and women or people?
That's part of it, because the one thing I will say, which is, I think, is a downfall in our society, when we think of differences, that's how polarized we get. We think it's only black and white. There are differences in the black community.
Yeah.
There are differences in the white community. There are different, classism is a point, right?
Yeah.
So yes, it is about, that's part of the differences, right? But there's so many different things. There's so many similarities and difference in every aspect of our life, whether it's education, whether it's religion, whether it's our likes, our dislikes, whatever it is. And that's the thing, getting past that polarizing aspect of difference is only black and white. Once we get beyond that, I think then we can have real dialogue.
Do you see this happening outside of your work? Do you see other people encouraging this kind of dialogue?
I do see others doing it, and I see it in the art world. I see it in writers. I see it in the performing arts. And so, again, me being a little biased, that's why art is important, because it allows us to get beyond those barriers that other aspects of life kind of create. Art has always found a way to get around and above those things.
Do you see this kind of thought procedure in your students?
Yes, and that's one of the things that in teaching, that's the one thing I always tell them. It's a quote I say, and I said it a little bit earlier. I said, art is your voice. With you can say what you want, how you want, as loud as you want. However, make what you say worth hearing. And I say that to say, your story is probably the best story that you can tell. I think a lot of the division that we have in this world, it kind of goes back to any aspect of fear. And the reason we have that fear is multiple reasons, but one of them is because I don't really appreciate or love who I am. If we can build confidence in every individual, and what I mean by confidence is not the cockiness, but a confidence, true confidence to where you know who you are and you love who you are and appreciate who you are. It doesn't matter necessarily what that person thinks of who you are.
It doesn't really affect that love. It doesn't
affect that love. It's not going to change, right? You can respect their opinion. And of course, there's a boundary. It's like, okay, now you're kind of stepping over a little bit, right? But at the same time, if we all were at that level, just imagine the dialogue we could have, and just imagine even the direction that we could take as a society. And I think that is the baseline, I love that term that you use, to our division in this world is fear. Bottom line, it's the fear.
I agree. I think fear is the great divide between all of us, and between us and ourselves,
right,
is fear. So in another way, your work is really also an act of self-love and self-affirmation.
Yes.
Which is good to have a daily practice of self-love and self-affirmation. It makes you more able to be a compassionate, loving, patient person in the world.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's something I want to instill in my students, because I know the students that come in my room is probably 10%, might be a little more, who actually want to continue art as a career or be an artist. But what I tell them is what this class, the whole purpose of this class is for you to kind of understand who you are in a different aspect.
Yeah.
And being able to express yourself. That's the key. Not how good or how great you are as an artist or a draftsman or a painter. That's just a caveat to this, right?
Right.
It's really about you feeling good coming in this time, the 70 minutes of my class, being able to express your idea how you want to express it, and feeling good about it, not based on the judgment, not based on how that person's work looked, but the fact that you were able to take something that was so deep within, right, and being able to bring it out so others can see it, regardless of how they approach it, how they interpret it. You're able to do that. And so that's the key that I want my students to take away from my class. That's it. Not necessarily to be a great artist, to respect the craft, to respect the beauty of art.
Yeah.
That's definitely key.
Yeah.
But also to respect their own story and how they express that, understanding that they have that power to do that.
Yeah, it's teaching self-expression, self-exploration.
And that self-love that you talk about, having that moment to love who they are where they are in that moment, but still loving that and appreciating that. Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing to teach. That's important. So tell me about this piece here.
Wow. So this piece is called Sunday Morning, and this actually is part of a series. And the reason I love this piece is because this is a point that I won't say always, I've been trying to actually get to. And what I mean by that is this marriage of some of that graphic design work that I've been doing with the fine art work. Even though this is a young African-American girl, she has different features, different facial things that allows to kind of create this kind of distorted appeal, but there's beauty in that distortion as well as ourselves. And so what I want to do is I want to always kind of join the past and the present, especially dealing with the African American experience. You can see in the window where you have sharecroppers to a point now, not only back then, but even thinking about the mindset of African Americans then to even now. And if you notice here, more modern, where she's holding a Barbie doll, but the Barbie is the African American Barbie, because there was a point in time where you didn't have Barbies that were different ethnicities. To where now you still have that. And the same tradition of Sunday morning before going to church or before going somewhere where a mom is always doing the hair of their daughter is kind of passing down that generational tradition, right? With the hot comb. That's something that was huge in the African American home. When you hear hot comb, you hear a lot of people talk about it. Either they experience it or they've heard stories about it. So it's just taking all these key moments in the Black experience and just adding them into this one piece.
It's almost like as you come through the painting, you're coming through the timeline, the African American timeline. That's really really skillfully done and really cool. You have this like past in the window, and then the mom is almost this conduit between the past and present, and then you have the daughter who's the the current generation, and she too is going to be the conduit and is the conduit for that experience.
That's the whole thing. Me putting these gems in there to start conversation. The people are like, well, why did he do it this way? Or why did you add this? Why? I'm glad you asked. But before I answer, what do you think it is?
What do you think it is?
Again, that conversation, because we all interpret things differently, and I love to hear what people think and see. A lot of times, I do have a vision for my work. I do have a story that I want to tell, but I also allow it to be open for you to receive how you want to receive it. I could tell you this one thing, and the person like, well, that's not what I saw. And instead of me as an artist saying, well, sorry, that's what it is, I'll allow you to be in that space because that's your connection to that piece. It might be something, part of it, whether it's the Barbie doll, whether it's the hot comb, there might be something in it, regardless of the overall story, that connects with you and how you see that, right? So I need, as an artist, allow you to see what you see in that piece, even though I did have a direction in creating it.
That's beautiful. That's a very allowing experience for the viewer, and then I think it's great to know what your thoughts are, but then also to know, like when I first looked at this, her expression comes out to me more than anything else. First, I see her face and I'm wondering, is she happy, or is she irritated, or is she yelling, or is she being kind of like a jokester and kind of like and mischievous? And I really am wondering about her. She's this like focal point for me, and I was thinking, as I was like, well, why is she this focal point for me? Why am I almost like concerned about wanting to understand what emotion she's experiencing? Because I'm a white woman who lives post 2020, who's very aware of racial unrest in our country and cares deeply about it. So my subconscious immediately goes like, is she okay? How's she doing? What are her feelings? What's happening for her? Before I go to like, okay, she's getting her hair done, right? The Barbie doll. And it's cool because I think someone else sitting here looking at this would be pulled by the sharecroppers in the window and have a whole different interaction. And if you get a couple people in a room together looking at something like that and talking about it, you get everybody's perspective. That's
and
so
a dialogue.
Cool. And a conversation. And then you leave being like, oh my God, I just saw this one piece 6 different ways. And I'm 6 times more informed than before.
That's it. My whole purpose is to have more dialogue. I think in this world, we need more dialogue. So,
I continue with that conversation. Well, thank you for this conversation. This has really been a joy.
Oh, thank you. It's such an honor to be a part of this. Thank you.
Absolutely, Orin. I appreciate it.
Sitting down with Orin and learning more about his origin story and ethos was a truly delightful, heartwarming experience. His luminant kindness and earnest care for human growth are apparent in his work, and in the simple fact of his presence. From his early childhood in Memphis, Orin learned painful truths about insidious racism in America, but found a way to subvert those experiences into opportunities for further education and connection. Finding inspiration from the words of Dr. King, his loving and wise family, and from the brilliant imagination of Stan Lee, Orin began a practice of expression through art that has led to the evocative work he is known for now. Orin's goal is to boldly and calmly face the realities of bigotry and racism, to encourage challenging and painful conversations to take place so that healing might occur. He sees that each and every one of us has a story, rife with similarities and differences alike, and that our coming together and sharing those stories is the best chance for harmony and understanding we've got. Orin is an agent of open conversation without fear, so that true connection and growth may occur. As someone who hopes deeply for equity and understanding in this world, I feel joy and a good dose of hope in hearing Orin's perspective and engaging with his art. It's beautiful to remember that our best work lies in our most open conversations, and that many of those conversations are already happening. Thanks for watching. Hopefully there was something in that video that inspired you that you can take with you throughout the week. Feel free to share this video with a friend or a family member, and be sure to like and subscribe so we can keep giving you awesome content. If you want to learn more about the show, you can do so by visiting otherwisewithjaneharvey.com. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter so you can get the latest in merch, episodes, podcasts, blogs, etc. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.